What's up, everybody? Welcome into another live episode of Speedway Soccer. I am your host tonight, Davey Shepard, and I'm joined by Ben Wright, Chris Ivy, and Jonathan Slape, all of BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We are Speedway Soccer, brought to you by Broadway Sports Media. Glad to be back tonight, guys. Been a while since we've done a live show. We've been busy with stuff over at Broadway Sports. Chris, Slape, Ben, all putting out stuff regularly, along with John Sloop, who's not here tonight. I'm busy over on Nashville Soccer Show. That's where you can find our content regularly. But we like to get together and do these live episodes when we can. And those come after kind of big, important, and in this case, pretty crazy results, which is exactly what last night was. Nashville SC wins 6-3 at FC Cincinnati, the arch rivals of the club. And look, let's get right into it, guys. Ben, I said it, I tweeted it, and then I said it on our kind of halftime Twitter spaces last night. I think that's the worst 20 minutes Nashville Soccer Club's ever played at any level. I looked back through USL results. I couldn't find a run that kind of triggered a memory, like a result that triggered a memory of anything like that. Anybody have any pushback against that at all? That was probably the worst spell the club's ever played.
No, the only thing that comes close is that spell against Sporting Kansas City last year. With the red card situation, just that spin and how much the momentum changed. But I think as a whole 20 minutes, I don't think there's a stretch of play that's anywhere near as bad.
The only thing that I could even possibly think of was that one home game against Toronto FC2 in their first year, like towards the end of the season. And I think they were up 2-0 or something and gave away a 2-goal lead in like 10 minutes or so and drew 2-2. But I mean, yeah, that was as bad as you have seen Nashville play. I think it's kind of rightly been swept under the rug a little bit because of how they came back and won. But yeah, it was just shocking to see how disorganized they were Like, they've played poorly at other times, but they've always been organized defensively, and that just you don't see that from defenders of this caliber and from a Gary Smith team, and it was pretty stunning.
Well, yeah, I want to go here next, Chris. We'll start with you. Like, I think what's even more shocking than the performance level for that 20 minutes was just like how it happened. Like, I mean, Dave Romney, the most consistent performer in probably the club's history, he was the worst player on the field, and it like wasn't even close for 20 minutes last night. And I mean, statistically speaking, I guess he was due, right? Like, you can say that. I mean, I know you run a lot of the numbers and stuff, Chris, but just how like outstanding was that for a guy of his caliber?
It was the first time we've certainly seen it in his time in Nashville. To me, it goes back to the switch in formation starting that game. We had been running with 3 center backs in the back for 3-something months now. So it was a curious decision to go to the 4-2-3-1. And at least in that first 30 minutes to the first half, Romney and Zimmerman kept looking, thinking that the other was, closer than what they were. And so the spacing was all off. They didn't know where the other partner was, and it led to a bad performance. Beyond just it being a curious decision in terms of we haven't played that formation in quite a while, it was more perplexing as I went back and watched it. And you have Brenner and Brandon Vasquez both sitting up top as strikers, both occupying both center backs. And so you get dragged one way, and all of a sudden you're leaving your partner on an island with no help out there. So it was by far the worst performance in a half we've seen from Romney, who's otherwise been arguably the most consistent Nashville performer in the 2 years in MLS.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, it's not like anybody else was particularly good for that 20 minutes. So let's not pin it squarely on Dave Romney. He did have the own goal. Own goals, I'm willing to just look the other way because it could happen to anybody at any point in time. He's called out on the penalty, and I know Jamie said it was soft last night. I don't think it was soft at all. I think it was a stone cold penalty for me. So there you see Nashville Soccer Club down 2-0, and it just gets weirder from there. Dan Lovitz is called for a foul in the box, given a yellow card. It looks like VAR is going to call it off. And then for some reason, the referee goes and decides the foul occurred before the ball was played. I just could not see that on my screen at all. Anybody have a different take there?
I thought he said. You
I was
take
just
it,
gonna
Chris.
say, yeah. So unfortunately for me, I have to watch, the ESPN Plus feed. I don't get the same feed as y'all. At least the Cincinnati broadcasters, it wasn't even about them talking about when the foul occurred. To them, they thought that it was originally called offsides, and then they saw that he was behind the last defender or in front. So
I thought it was
got a different interpretation of what we heard.
I thought they were saying that
broadcast.
Brenner was offsides on the cross that would have resulted.
Right.
Which, I mean, I get that he's offside, but I mean, either Lovett's still fouled. It doesn't matter if the guy he was passing the ball to was offside. Lovett still tackled him and fouled him. So
Well,
I mean,
I think what they were saying is that so what Jamie was saying on the broadcast was that the foul was originally called on like Lovett's follow through. And so the offside would have occurred before the foul occurred. So there was no foul is like what the original ruling on the now. I mean, that's what happened because he called it back off. The guy raised his flag and they didn't point to the spot. And then he went to VAR and changed his decision. So I still don't know how they arrived where they arrived. But hey, they arrived there, right? I mean, it was a penalty, and I don't necessarily disagree with the foul. I mean, Lovett's definitely fouled the guy. So I think the more interesting conversation is what happened on the penalty, which I don't know what's in Brenner's head there. Like, you've just got to deposit the goal. Like, you've got to score. He goes for the Paneka right now. I mean, like, honestly, it was borderline. I don't know if it had enough power to like even get to the goal. I mean, it was just like
it was going to take a bounce like at the goal line.
Yeah, it was crazy, man. And Joe Willis just stands there, makes a very comfortable save,
and then gives him the finger.
Brenner afterwards.
I mean,
which, if you haven't seen that on Twitter, just look around Joe Willis. I'm sure it'll come up very soon. And that was really the turning point in the game, right? I mean, that kind of gave Nashville a foot back in it. And from there, very soon after, Hany Mukhtar gets his first of 3 assists on the night. Walker Zimmerman, as he's done so often for Nashville Soccer Club, scores on a header on a set piece. And it's 2-1. Nashville's back in the game. Ben, if there was a bright spot last night for Cincinnati, it's Brandon Vasquez, right?
Yeah, almost Nashville SC legend Brandon Vasquez. That was his 3rd consecutive game with a goal. So I don't think it was just a bright spot last night. I think kind of late in the season, he's turned out to be a real bright spot for them and a complimentary piece too next to Brenner. I think it's going to be interesting now that Chris Albright is back. Now that he's taken over, you're kind of seeing some of the Philadelphia influence with the 4-4-2 diamond that they played. It'll be interesting to see how that changes depending on who the permanent manager is. But I think Brenner and Vasquez make an interesting partnership up top, kind of the way that Vasquez can hold the ball up and Brenner can run off of him. So I'm really interested to see how that continues, because I think that kind of trio of those 2 attackers and then Lucho Acosta underneath, I mean, it's legitimately the only positive Cincinnati has had going for them all season and really for their 3 seasons in MLS. So I'm interested to see what happens with that.
That means they still have a lot that they need to do to make that work, because they clearly don't have a 6 that can hold that midfield spot in. So, but I mean, like I said, they're so far off of where they need to be. But it'll be interesting to see what happens once they have an actual GM in place.
Yeah, I mean, Vasquez I thought was very impressive last night. I think he scores 2, right? And then earned the penalty as well. No. Sorry, I'm blanking on who earned the penalty.
No, he scored their 3rd.
Castillo earned the penalty. Vasquez, the first one, did not get a touch on it because it was ruled a Dave Romney own goal.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry. It was, ruled the own goal. That's correct. Sorry. So they get us a third goal right away, basically. Nashville goes down 3-1 again, and Randall Ayala right before the half. Goal of the season, I would say, probably for Nashville Soccer Club. Maybe that or that team goal against DC United. Just perfect form, well taken into the side net. I thought it was outrageous.
Can we just take a second here? Is there anybody in the club in Nashville SC who can hit a ball better than Randall Ayala? Because when that guy
Olu
catches
Akinyode on accident, I think. But other than that,
I don't know.
Another-
We've seen Annabelle take a shot outside the box. He can hit the ball well.
he was
But I
going to
think-
be my next choice, but I feel like we've just like even on goals that he has that even on shots that he hasn't scored, we've seen him come close. There was one a couple weeks ago that hit the side netting, and I thought it was going to rip a hole in the net. I just feel like when Randall Leal hits a ball, it stays hit, and he's a player I just love watching take a strike.
couldn't agree more. And that one last night, I mean, I don't know that you had to have one before the half to go out and get all 3 points, but it sure did help things going into the half, 3-2 instead of 3-1, that late in stoppage time. We talked about it at halftime, Ben. Cincinnati had scored 3 goals in 2 games before that. They had lost both of them. You knew they were going to be tightening up going into the half at 3-2. And it was just so apparent after halftime that Nashville was right in the game. Even though it took, 15, 17 minutes to get that third goal. I think it was the 62nd minute. Sapong tied it up off of Walker Zimmerman header, kind of just glanced over. Good to see CJ Sapong get the ball rolling last night. And look, this was a lot of the criticism that we had talked about for a few weeks was, hey, the front line's not playing well. And we're going to touch on selection here in a little bit. Other than Hany MVP, Randall Leal had cooled off, CJ Sapong had cooled off, and it was kind of tight up front. What had looked so good in June and early July had just totally cooled off. CJ Sapong, I think we've kind of been saying all year, hey, this guy's probably going to hit a wall sooner rather than later. But last night he gets that ball rolling again. He scores 2 himself. And that third Nashville goal, you could kind of just see the life leave the Cincinnati players once that third one went in. And to me, that was it. It was like once they tied it up, I knew the result was in hand. Thoughts on the rest of the game from there, guys? I mean, that's when Ake Loba took over, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on him. We've been saying how many times we got to see the guy with other starters. We've got to see him with Leal. We've got to see him with Hany MVP. And you saw right off the bat on the goal he scored. How many times have we seen a ball as good as that ball Randall Leal played to Ake Loba? I think he's been making good runs for a couple of months now. He just has been in with guys that aren't able to find him in the same way that those starting quality players are.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit at halftime when we did our Twitter spaces. I believe it was Tim Sullivan for Club and Country who put out the stat that when Cincinnati scores 3 goals, they've lost both times. And so I feel like we talked about how there was just so much space on both sides. Nashville was leaving a ton of space in behind, and Cincinnati was leaving a ton of space in behind. And I kind of pushed for maybe even bringing on a guy like Jack Mayer and switching to more of that back 3 that we've seen before, just to make sure that Cincinnati doesn't get another one. And credit to Gary Smith. I mean, I think we'll talk about later. I think he got the selection wrong off the bat, but I think he made the right choice at halftime, bringing in Ake Loba. And I think it was kind of the perfect game for him just because there was so much space. He had plenty of space to run in behind, and he really, I mean, he defended well, but this isn't a game where like the priority is to be a defensive winger. He was put out there to go out and score a couple of goals. And so I think it was kind of a perfect scenario for him. It wasn't a low pressure scenario, but I mean, they had nothing to lose at halftime. So I think it made a lot of sense to put him on, and it was the kind of performance that we've been wanting to see from him. Hopefully it's a kick-starting point for him because Sapong looked great, but you can't count on him to be the only guy consistently scoring you goals. And so I think the more options they have to score, the better. And hopefully that is just a jumping off point for Loba.
Yeah, and going into the past couple of weeks, we've talked about there's been some cooling off of players, and my biggest concern as we get to the end of the season and start to head into playoffs has always been secondary scoring, because if Hany isn't playing well and scoring, if CJ's not scoring, if Randall doesn't have goals, there at this point there had been very few other goals other than the random set piece here and there. So it was good to see Loba get that first goal and really be able to stretch the defense. We saw him in the game against Orlando, the game against Columbus, where he was able to get in behind and play that ball back to Hany for the tying goal. So I think, like Davey said, we've seen him making like making good runs. And I think that having an extended period of time with the guys of Hany and Randall and CJ is good for his confidence.
Yeah, he's been making good runs, and you could tell that late in that first half, looking for somebody to make those runs off the back shoulder. There was acres and acres of space for someone to take advantage of it, and to Loba's credit, he did. And it's what we've all asked for is get him with Leal, get him with Mukhtar, and we think the goals are going to come, and they absolutely did. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily the answer going forward either. One, just because we know Gary likes the defensive presence on the wing, but two, went back and watched that second half earlier today. And other than the first couple of minutes, we just abandoned the right wing for about the 50th, 55th minute on. And Loba was just playing as a second striker right next to CJ, occupying a lot of times the same space as CJ too. But luckily, Cincy's defense couldn't really figure it out. And Loba made those dangerous back shoulder runs, and they were able to play off of each other to a degree. But at the same time, I don't think Gary's going to give up that entire right flank in the future either.
I talked about our Nashville Soccer Show last week. Lovett's missing out for a few weeks. I thought was just pretty tough on the team. I think he just brings so much. Really, really good to see him back out there. Taylor Washington does get an appearance, 101st, which, again, congratulations to Taylor Washington. First ever team guest on Speedway Soccer, which is always fun to remember.
Shout out to Alley Taps.
Shout out to Alley Taps Studio, absolutely.
Shout out to Tom.
Shout out to Tom, our guy.
What a throwback.
Yeah, what a throwback for real. So the game finishes, guys, 6-3. Ake Loba gets a pair. CJ Sapong gets another one in the second half. It was Loba, Leal, Sapong in the second half. Look, 6-3 is just an outstanding finishing result for that game. I don't know that you can ever be mad when your team scores 6 goals, I don't think. But that being said, guys, what do you really feel about this result overall? Like, are you totally comfortable with it? Do you think it kind of gives you questions about maybe team selection or, I don't know, maybe just formation in general going into the last kind of 2 games of the season?
I think a couple things. I mean, 1, 3 points was huge. And it doesn't matter who that came against. You needed 3 points. And you're seeing now they're in second place and they have a little 2-point cushion ahead of Philadelphia. So that could prove to be huge. I think more so than anything, I think that the confidence, hopefully, that they'll take from scoring 6 goals will just result in better performances against Orlando and New York. But I'm not sure, just because Nashville scored 6 goals against Cincinnati, I'm not sure that we can just say, okay, all the attacking issues are fixed. I think it could result in improvement down the line, but I don't think you don't want to take too much from a win against a team who's just that historically bad. And I think the other thing, at least for me, is it shows just how much better they are in that back three. They look much more organized. I think it fits the team's strengths better, and I think they hadn't played in a back four for the previous 15 games. So I think, for me, that's going to be the biggest thing to watch for, is what Gary Smith does against Orlando. I'd be really surprised, as good as Lobo was, I'd be really surprised if he started that aggressive of a front four against Orlando. But I also think Lobo needs minutes to keep improving. And there's not really a natural place for him in that kind of 3-4-1-2 without dropping one of Leal, Mukhtar, and Sapong. So he has a ton of selection issues, which is a good thing, and it's also good players are going to be missing out.
But that being said, Orlando hasn't been good. We'll get into it. We're going to preview Orlando here in a little bit, but I do think, like you said, Ben, they scored 6 goals, but it is Cincinnati. But I think regardless, it does good to get some of these players a bit more confidence, and I think that it does a lot with the result, especially of Philadelphia dropping points, getting Nashville back into second place, because they now know they have 2 games left. Second place is in their hands, and they really have now something to go after. looking forward to the last 2 games of the season, knowing that it's all in their hands. They don't have to be sitting around waiting for results.
Chris, any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of with Ben on this one in terms of what you see in the next match. I don't think that Loba gets the start. It's kind of for the same reasons I brought up, that it worked in the situation where we were down a couple goals and we really needed to pile it on, and you were willing to take a hit defensively, even though we kind of needed to shore up the back. So I think unless Gary has some idea that he wants to rest CJ for this one and have him fully ready to go against the Red Bulls on decision day, but even then, I don't think that's going to be the case because we have 7 days in between those 2 games. So it's a great problem to have. It's great that Loba finally got the monkey off the back and got his first goal. It's vitally important for the same reasons we keep talking about. We need somebody else to score reliably other than those top 3 guys. And if you have one more attacking piece you can bring off the bench, yeah, that's a $7 million super sub. But for this year, it's kind of what Loba's going to have to be. So I don't see him necessarily starting these next 2 regular season matches, but it's a nice piece who now looks very dangerous, and we know what he can do coming off the bench.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's like a blessing that even we think now at this point you could count on him to be that super sub, right? Like just a few days ago, we're wondering if that's even going to be the case. To the goal and the assist, I think is very, very helpful. Obviously, it gets the ball rolling, but kind of the point you all have been making, I think now that CJ and like all these other guys have kind of got their start again, you've got to kind of stick with them as they've been the consistent performers all year long. Guys, I kind of want to head from this out of Cincinnati into just some dialogue that we've been seeing on a lot of Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, a lot of places lately. And it's centered kind of on Gary Smith. And what I think has been confusing to me is that there's never really a middle ground on Gary Smith, is that there's really 2 camps. There's people who are maybe not saying Gary out, but are saying everything that someone who would say Gary out says, if that makes sense.
I mean, there's a lot. There's been Gary out.
There is Gary out. Don't get me wrong. There is that. But then there's just a lot of it, and I think it's marketed as a more refined version of Gary out that is just only ever bringing up his faults and never kind of speaking to the qualities of this team. And that's what I think me and maybe Ben want to touch on the most here, is that I don't think you can separate the qualities of this team from Gary Smith. Because I think if you just look at everything on paper, I don't think on paper this is a second in a conference talent level on paper, personally. I know Hany Mukhtar is performing well. Basically at forward, you're relying on a guy that's over at the wrong side of 30. Walker Zimmerman, Defender of the Year. The rest of them are got a group of castaways that Mike Jacobs has kind of pieced together, and Gary Smith is maximized. So I just struggle with I don't think the guy's perfect, right? I don't think any of us do. Hell, I almost lost our credentials 3 years ago for saying that he was Barry Trotz of soccer, right? Which I meant as a compliment, and I will maintain until the day I die. But that's what happened. So I think there have been interesting selection decisions over the last few weeks. I think there was an interesting selection decision last night. I can't in any world understand Hawkinson getting the start over Loba last night against that team. That being said, like, the guy's got him in second place with a 2-point cushion with 2 games to play. No one in the world predicted this team to finish second in the Eastern Conference this year. I just don't understand how you separate where the team is at from the manager. And I think there's a lot of people trying a lot of different things to do that. And I just don't necessarily know why you want to do it. Does that mean you're going to be happy with them all the time? No. But I just think it's weird, man. I don't know. Any thoughts?
I think I'd probably push back a little bit on the distinction, the separation between Gary Smith and the overall talent level of the roster. Because, yeah, I mean, that's getting into another conversation. Gary I think he had a pretty big impact on the roster building. And I think the roster is a legitimate roster. And I think Nashville did really well to pick pieces that weren't really wanted by other teams. So I feel like that's maybe getting into a little bit of a different argument. I think the main thing is that over the summer, there were just the way that Nashville was playing, there were a ton of expectations around this team. And I think you can't say that now that Nashville went on this stretch of whatever 6 or 7 games without a win, that they're underperforming expectations. I think the reason they have such high expectations are because Gary Smith had them overperforming. And so I think if you're gonna give him slack, if you're gonna give him flack for underperforming, you have to also give him credit for raising those expectations in the first place. I've disagreed with some of his lineup selections. I think at times he can tend to be overly conservative. I mean, we've talked about it in the past. There have been a couple times where they've been up a goal or two, and I want to see him put on an attacker and go for a third goal, and he's opted to go the other way and try to hold on to a 1 or 2 goal lead. So yeah, there have been things I've had issues with, but I think at the end of the day, Nashville are the 6th expansion team in MLS history, just the 4th since 2009 to make the playoffs in their first 2 years. I think anything other than just saying Gary Smith has done a fantastic job is just kind of losing sight of just how well Nashville have performed. And I think the pros far outweigh the cons. So yeah, I just feel like at this point where Nashville is right now, it's just a really weird time to be having this discussion. If they miss the playoffs next year and have a ton of issues, sure, have this conversation. But right now it just feels like a weird time to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's then just the nature of fandom. I mean, everyone has high expectations, but I think that, Ben, to your point where you said that no one had these expectations going in the season, that's right. I mean, I think out of us, Davey is the only one that predicted a home playoff game going into the season. However, I will say that Gary Smith's production and where he's got Gary Smith and the team, where they have gotten to this point, changes the facts because they have performed at a high level, and so they can hit those heights. And I think that's maybe a little bit where some fans' frustration is coming from, the fact that they've seen how good this team can be when they're firing on all cylinders, and no team is going to keep up that level of success and output except maybe a few teams on the planet. But I think that, I just think that people have high expectations based on how well they were playing before this slight blip.
Yeah, just one quick thing to add too. I think some of it is that we have established really high expectations and everyone wants to meet that. But I think Gary Smith's style is always going to lend itself to a small vocal minority of fans who are going to be Gary Smith out. It's a little bit more conservative. It's a little bit more pragmatic. Instead of the $7 million striker, you're playing Luke Hawkinson, who was in the USL last year. And you're always going to have people who are going to second guess that regardless, just because they want to see the more exciting attacking talent out there. So I think that's just one of those things with Gary you're always going to have to live with to a certain extent.
Our guy Claudio's in the chat here. He says, after talking to some people close to Cincinnati organization yesterday as we covered the game for Football on L'Opiel, guys, they all had the same offer in terms of exchanging anytime what Gary and the team has done this past 2 seasons for what they've had to live through. Would that be a fair take? I think it's an abundantly fair take, Claudio. I mean, we're saying Gary is up there with one of 5 other guys who have ever gotten an expansion team into the playoffs twice in a row, to a team that has now won the Wooden Spoon 3 years in a row. And so, yeah, I mean, they're absolutely right. And I'm sure they would beg for Gary Smith. And so, yeah, we appreciate you hanging out, Claudio. We appreciate the insight there as a guy who made the trip up to Cincinnati yesterday.
They already have
you guys are all nailed on. Go ahead, Slate.
I would say they already have historically the second worst goal difference in MLS history. So they have a negative 102 goal difference in their 3 years in MLS. The only team worse is Chivas USA at 132.
I believe Colorado. I think if you're talking about Matt Doyle, I think he came back later and said Colorado. Also, I think they were like negative 126. but I mean, either way, they've been in the league 3 years and they're competing with a team that's been an original.
Yeah.
I just had one last thought on the Gary Smith issue. I think you saw kind of the worst stretch of the season from Nashville over the last 6 or 7 games, and they drew 6 of them and lost 1. And I think you're kind of seeing the floor. And I think that bodes well for them in the playoffs, because even when they're playing poorly, they still hang in games and they still get draws. And in the playoffs, that's all you need, if you can keep things tight. And then the other thing, just MLS is all about peaking at the right time. And so if it turns, I mean, you can't really have this full conversation until the season's over and you know what happens really in these next 2 games. But if it turns out that Gary Smith rotated a bunch of guys, kept his squad healthy, and then took off against Cincinnati and keeps it going against Orlando and New York, and gets in form heading into the playoffs. I mean, I think that it turns out that maybe those decisions that we were all complaining about a couple weeks ago were the right choice. So it's just, I think we can't really have the full conversation here for another couple weeks.
Well, let's do this. Let's preview these next 2 games, and then we'll talk a little bit of Hany Mukhtar at the end. Orlando next, guys. That's on the weekend. And then the following week, Sunday, November 7th, Nashville at home against New York Red Bulls. Team that Nashville has drew this season, Orlando 2-2. And one of the very few losses, 2-0 loss away at New York Red Bulls very early in the season, the first loss of the year for the boys in gold. Let's start with Orlando. Slape, you mentioned not in a great run of form lately, but still a pretty formidable opponent, a playoff team, a lot of talent across the team there. I say this every year with Nany. I'll believe that Nany is going to be an impact player come October, November, when Nany is an impact player come October, November. It just seems like he always hits that cliff. Which is unfortunate, because I think when he's on, he is as fun of a player as there is to watch in the league. And then it's just so fruitless come end of the season.
I will say that they've done a better job of managing his minutes this year. He's having a somewhat of an impact, but I think the biggest thing for Orlando is the fact that Daryl Dike is healthy and is scoring goals. He scored again. They did lose 3-2 to Columbus last night, but I mean, DK scored. He scored in the week against New England. So I mean, he's scoring goals, and so I mean, I think that is something to keep in mind. We saw when these 2 teams played just not too long ago, what havoc Daryl Dike can cause on that back line. And I think that, I mean, it's something Nashville's going to have to keep an eye on, especially going back to Exploria Stadium. We saw what Nashville did at the end of the season last year there, but I still think they're going to, I think they'll get the result, but I think it's going to be a tough game.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And going back to that game from last season, how different Yonder Cadiz, the outlook was on him at that point last year compared to this point, this year. It's kind of interesting to look back. He ties it up, or did he score the winner in that game? I can't remember.
He scored the winner in the game.
He scores the winner in that game, and it kind of secures that playoff spot. You're going to make it at that point in time. Just wasn't meant to be with Yonder Cadiz in Nashville. I guess he still has a role to play here, possibly in the playoffs or these last few games. We'll see. Looking back at Orlando's last few matches, it's pretty interesting. They've been solid. So they lose to Columbus, which is not a great result, but a draw against New England, draw against Montreal, who's fighting for a playoff spot, win against Cincinnati, win against DC United, and then the 2-2 against Nashville at home. It's not a great run of form, but it's also not terrible. They're playing good in games against some good teams.
But it
guys,
was the
what are you
clapping
thinking here result-wise? I mean, a draw in that game away is a good result, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying the draw against New England.
Yeah,
it may think that you may look at it and say, a draw against New England is good, but they were up 2-0 toward the end, and then Bruce put on the good guys, and then they just ran rampant. I
think they scored both their goals after like the 83rd minute or something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
He put on Buxa, he put on Heel, Tejan Buchanan, and then they ran rampant.
I think
you think a draw is the result?
I think a draw is a good result. Obviously, I think Nashville is capable of getting a win, and I think they're the better side, and I think we've seen that whenever they've played. But I think Orlando, I think there's something to be said for just being kind of desperate, and Orlando really need the points as much as Nashville kind of needs a point to stay ahead of Philadelphia. Orlando just needs points to make a playoff game. They're at home. Daryl Dike is scoring. I think they're going to be pretty angry after that loss to Columbus. So, I mean, I think on paper Nashville is better, but you can't go into Orlando and take this team lightly. And I think a draw I would be pretty happy with from a Nashville perspective.
Yeah, I think a draw would be a good result, but at the same time, I think this is one where, unlike the past few weeks where the draws were 0-0, we were tight defensively and didn't do much going forward, there's going to be goals to be had here. Orlando rarely ever keeps clean sheets, even at home. They generally bleed at least a goal or two. So if Nashville can lock things down defensively, even if we give up a goal, there's potential for 2 goals for Nashville here. So it wouldn't be out of the question to go down there and win it. And the boys have shown that they can do it, having done it at the end of the season last year. But in the end, I mean, I think it's going to be a 1-1, 2-2 draw type of game down there.
Switching over to New York Red Bulls, 3 matches left for Red Bulls. They have a Saturday game against Montreal. They have a Wednesday game at home against Atlanta United, and then travel to Nashville on decision day, 2:30 start, Sunday, November 7th. Guys, they've got it all left to play for. They're just fighting for playoff position, just like everybody else. They're on the edge. I mean, they've got that game in hand on DC United, and so they could be heading into that last day of the season in 7th position, maybe even as good as 6th, I think. Looking at that run-in, look, it's always good to just have your business handled and know you're going to have a playoff game before decision day gets here, right? And that's why I think going for the win against Orlando, I think, is important. I don't think you can go down there saying a draw is good enough. I think getting all 3 there, the win secures a home playoff game for Nashville, and it really, really makes securing that 2nd seed a lot more likely. With Philadelphia playing FC Cincinnati this weekend, you would assume that's going to be 3 points for the Union. And so that leaves you the opportunity, if you can take care of business against Orlando, to go into the last game of the season saying, hey, a draw is going to be good enough here, likely to secure that that 2nd seed. Red Bull's been pretty good lately. They've kind of been one of those teams who floundered around, and it looked like a really bad loss for Nashville there for a while. But they've played well over the last couple of weeks. I think they're even above New York City there for a while. Have cooled back off as of late. Lose to DC United just the other day. And that's a pretty bad result for them because that's that last person in position, in the position ahead of them. But thoughts on New York Red Bulls seeing this season on decision day?
I mean, New York, while they did drop that 1-0 win against DC last night, I mean, they won their previous 4 games, which really has got them in the position. Between those 4 games and those 2 games they played in quick succession to NYCFC are really what got them back into playoff contention for a while. And so I think that, Davey, like you said, I think you have to win this week in Orlando, knowing that FC Cincinnati goes and plays at Philadelphia Union. So you have to assume, because even if Nashville gets a draw, Philly wins. Philly jumps Nashville on the first tiebreaker, which is wins. So, I mean, I think looking at Red Bulls, that's going to be a pretty tough game just because they're going to be alive and probably will be fighting for a final playoff spot. It could be different, though. Say they win their next 2, they come in there pretty firmly in the playoff position. But, I mean, with the way the East just jumbled together, especially around the playoff line, there's definitely they're definitely going to be playing something.
Yeah, the one thing I would say with the Red Bulls, while they, up until Wednesday, they were on a good run, they've had some wins, you got to look at against who those wins came against. Columbus, which is below the playoff line, Miami, below the playoff line, Cincinnati, we know how bad they are. And then they picked up 2 wins against New York City FC, but that was at the same time when NYCFC hadn't scored a goal in a month's time. Now, part of that was the Red Bulls contributing to that, but to me it was, well, I want to see them prove it against a top quality playoff caliber team, and that's going to be the measuring stick. And Wednesday against DC, it was on the road. They give up a goal and they lose that one. But I'm not too concerned despite their form, just because I want to see it against a team that is legit first.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Chris, so guys, kind of heading in here to the home stretch on this episode. We got about 5 minutes left tonight. We've talked about FC Cincinnati. We talked about Gary. We've talked about the upcoming matches. Joel says, should we expect limited minutes for most of our starters versus Red Bulls? I would imagine not, particularly with the second. Like maybe if Philadelphia loses this weekend and Nashville beats Orlando and we know second seed is locked up, maybe. But I would not expect that. I think Gary's going to be pushing hard for that second seed just because it gives you opportunity to control your own destiny throughout the playoffs.
And I think you want to head into the playoffs in form too. You don't want to take a week off and just hope that you can put your starters back in the playoffs and hope they can pick back up. You want to get them into a rhythm. They've been out of a rhythm for a while, and you just want to hit the playoffs running.
Well, and you also got to figure there's the break. There's a week break after this final game of the season, going in the international break, and then looking at the calendar as to when Nashville would play a home playoff game. There was some conversation in one of the group chats talking about looking at, so that's the 20th, the 20th, and the 21st, and then the 23rd. Well, the Titans are at home on the 21st, so it wouldn't be the 21st. They're probably not going to play a home game the day before the Titans have a home game. So you got to figure that game is the 23rd. So at that point, you're looking at 16 days from the end of the season until the playoffs. There's no way you want to rest guys and make that, 23 games.
23 days.
I mean,
right?
it's essentially the length of a first round bye, and we've seen in the past a lot of times the number one seed who gets a first round bye has struggled because they're sitting and just watching other teams play competitive games, and so by the time they get back into it, they've had three weeks off. I think it's essentially what you're going to be seeing from Nashville. The only upside is that everyone's going to have to deal with that too. But yeah, I don't think you can throw away a chance to find form just because you're already in the playoffs and you want to get some guys who haven't played much this season some minutes. Get the minutes next year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Guys, last thing I want to touch on just real quick before we head out. Hany Mukhtar has been outstanding this season. He gets 3 assists. He goes over 10-10, only player in the league to be there right now. He's at 14 goals and 12 assists. I want to talk just a little bit about the season he's had in general, posed under the question of, is there any chance of the MVP being a reality for Hany Mukhtar? I think I know where a lot of our answers are going to be here, but I think that my great point is that even though I don't think he is going to win that MVP award, just based on how good Carlos Gil has been, based on how good New England have been, and we know the reality is that these things turn into the best player on the best team, and that's what really Carlos has been there in New England. Hany Mukhtar's been outstanding. Tom Bogert came on earlier. He said he thought he would flirt with 10-10. That was in our preview episode. I did say, and I'm going to pat myself on the back here, that I thought he could go 13-11 or 14-12 or something like that. And that was really just a gut feeling that Hany was going to stretch it out. And I said, I think he'll be in the conversation for MLS Best 11. And look, I think that's what he is, right? Which is pretty remarkable that, hey, you want to talk about a lot of that Gary Smith criticism from earlier of, hey, this guy doesn't know offensive players. He's too conservative. I mean, he's getting the best out of this guy who last year, half of the national media is ready to write off, right? So I think he's just been outstanding, and I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to kind of touch on that as well.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, I think Carlos Gil is definitely going to win MLS MVP, and I don't think that is in any way a slight on Hany Mukhtar. Gil is going to set, even missing a month, Gil is going to set and break records for a league historical number of chances created. So, I mean, that in and of itself is very impressive. But I think that, what Hany has done and come in and done and bounce back from this season, I know that this isn't necessarily the award, but you could almost make a case that comeback player of the year. I know it was a shortened season, but Hany Mukhtar, the bounce back, I think he had 4-4 last year to come back with where he has performed this year and to be the catalyst for what this team has accomplished so far. I think he's firmly in the best 11 and would be shocked with where he's at.
Yeah, Gil's going to definitely win the MVP. It's a narrative award as much as anything, but we at least should, obviously applaud Hany for a 10-10 season. It happens on average. I looked back earlier today, about once per season throughout MLS's history, and looking at the more recent past of the guys who have also put up 10-10 seasons: Carlos Vela, Carlos Gil, Ignacio Piatti, Miguel Almiron, Darwin Quintero, Luciano Acosta, Diego Valeri. I mean, that's the who's who of standout number 10s in this league for the last several years. And to put Hany with that category, he's absolutely deserved it. He's had a fantastic season, but unfortunately, it's like I said, MVP is a narrative award, and it's going to go to Carlos Gil because New England's just been so far better than everybody else.
Yeah, I don't think I have any complaints with Carlos Gil winning it at all, because like Davey said, these things go to the best player on the best team, and I think he's hands down been that. As far as Joel, your question about if Gil wins it, even if New England don't do well in the playoffs, the MVP voting closes on October 8th, which I believe is the day after decision day, so it's purely based on the regular season.
November 8th.
November 8th. Geez, wow. Whatever, the day after decision day is when it closes. So no, it doesn't. It only includes the regular season. And I think, look, Hany Mukhtar. We've been talking about it. Just what he's done this year compared to last year. I mean, it was a concern for 2/3 of the season last year, just how little he was producing. I think you've seen how valuable those minutes that he got in the early part of the season, even where he didn't look like he was really doing anything. I think you see how valuable it is that he adapted to the league. He had time, he got reps, he's comfortable in this system, and you're seeing him really just carry on where he left off last year down the stretch and into the playoffs. I think we've seen flashes from him in the past, and he's just strung together a remarkable season, and really been the catalyst for this entire team. And I think everything that they've done in the attacking third, for the most part, has started with him. So I think while he won't win MLS MVP, I think he's easily a best 11 caliber player. I think he's been the most important player for Nashville this season. And I think if they do anything in the playoffs, it's probably going to be because of him. So I don't think missing out on the MVP should be too big of a blow for him.
No, I'm right there with you. I think that's spot on. Guys, been a good time tonight. Glad to get back together for a live episode. Again, you can find all of us over at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. Check us out on Twitter, too, at Ben Wright, at JSSlape, right? Or no, JSlapeSSP. I do that wrong every time. Chris, give me your Twitter handle.
Chris Ivy 865.
Chris Ivy 865, and I am Davey T. Shep on Twitter. Check us out there. Check our stuff over at Broadway Sports Media and the Nashville Soccer Show on 104.5 The Zone. Hey, we appreciate you tuning in. Everybody in the comments, thanks. And, hey, Ben and I will be out with a fun one early next week for you. We're going to sit down with Hany Mukhtar, the guy who we just spent 10 minutes talking about. Sit down and see what his time's been like at MLS, and just give you guys a little bit of a picture of who's been hard to get a hold of for the last 2 years. We're really excited for that one. We hope you'll check that out early next week. Should be out by Wednesday, but we'll keep you posted on when. Again, thanks for listening tonight. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks so much.
Never go full shepherd.
Nope.